Welcome to The Inquiry on the BBC World Service. Each week we bring you 4 expert witnesses answering one pressing question from the news. It seems like every week now we hear about a big company being hacked and private data being compromised. US credit rating agency Equifax is one of the latest. Last month, the personal details of 145 million Americans were hacked. But if you're like me, it probably doesn't sink in. It all seems to be happening somewhere else, to someone else. Then, last week, I typed my email address into a website which searches through data from more than 200 website hacks to let people know if they've been a victim. I clicked submit, and up on the screen flashed some familiar corporate logos. Those companies had all been hacked and my data had been exposed 6 different times. It was a shock. But I'm guessing I'm not alone. Most of us are probably a bit blasé when it comes to our online privacy, unaware how vulnerable our data is, unconscious of how much of it we're giving to companies, unsure what they're doing with it. I'm James Fletcher, and this week we're asking, is privacy dead?
Part 1. Your database of ruin.
I am carrying this little tracker in my pocket, which we like to call at the American Civil Liberties Union, a little policeman in my pocket.
The little policeman our first expert witness is talking about is something that many of us carry, a smartphone. It tracks us everywhere we go, but, like a real policeman, it can often be helpful.
It allowed me to find this studio today without having to have a map. It allowed me to find the place nearby to get my coffee before I came in, and even to like someone's tweet before the interview began.
Ben Weisner is the director of the Speech, Privacy and Technology Project at the American Civil Liberties Union. He's also chief legal advisor to surveillance whistleblower Edward Snowden. And, like me, probably like you, he's an avid user of technology.
Technology has created enormous conveniences for us, but
there's always a but, isn't there? And that's what Ben Weisner is going to help us explore. Technology does allow us to do so many amazing things, but what's the cost in terms of privacy? First up, let's get a handle on what privacy is.
It's our autonomy to choose how we want to interact with the world, to control our information in the contexts in which we share it or don't share it. I may want my friend to know something that I definitely don't want my mother to know about, and I may want my mother to know something that I definitely don't want the government to know about.
For simplicity, in this program, we'll be concentrating mostly on the impact of corporations rather than governments. Those corporations, Facebook, Google, Amazon, and hundreds more, make the technology that all of us use. And every time we do, we're generating a huge amount of data.
We use Google to search the world. Google uses our searches to search us. All of the information that you type into that bar is going into a profile of you that company maintains.
It's not just Google. Tinder, Uber, Amazon, Twitter. If you use them, they have your data. As we explored in a previous edition of The Inquiry, Facebook builds its profile of you from your likes and posts. Your phone knows where you are, when you wake up, how much you exercise. And newer smart appliances are going to be gathering more and more information about all sorts of aspects of our lives.
You'll be watching your television will be watching you.
Some of this you might have known or been vaguely aware of. Some of it you might be surprised by. But remember we said privacy is about control. If you're using any of these services, at some point you've clicked on a button that says, I agree to all this taking place. And we do get all the amazing benefits of technology in return. So are we just making an informed bargain?
It's literally impossible for consumers to read all of those agreements. If they did, they would spend months of the year just reading privacy policies. What we all do instead is we click agree. In legal terms, we've consented. In meaningful terms, have we consented?
This gets even trickier because there's data that we're at least vaguely aware we're sharing, like when you type in a search or click on a like button. But using all this data, companies can guess things about you that you've never told them.
You can be sure that these companies know not only whether you're gay or straight or bisexual or trans, but also know whether you have a mental health problem. They know whether you are having an extramarital affair because they've managed to make highly accurate predictions based on the information that you've supplied and the network of people who you interact with.
All this data about us is used to target advertising and sell us stuff. And more, it's also being used to decide whether we're eligible for products or services, everything from bank loans to car insurance. In return for all this data, we get the apps and services we love. Data for services. It's the business model of the technology-driven world, and we're going to explore the privacy implications of that bargain in a few minutes. But with all this information being gathered, there's another big risk to our privacy.
We hear all too often this blasé remark that I don't need to be worried about surveillance because I have nothing to hide. For every single one of us, there is some pile of data that exists, the publication of which would cause us enormous harm and in some cases even professional and personal ruin. Every single one of us has a database of ruin.
All that data, it's meant to be protected, stored safely so that only the algorithms can see it. But is it?
Part 2. Naked on the Net.
My alter ego, it was a young lady, a young woman, and I gave her the name Anna Rosenberg. I don't know, it just came over me.
Last year, our second expert witness decided to adopt a fake name and set up a fake company.
I set up a website and I decorated with some fancy stock photos, especially hipster photos with these glasses and mustache and some stuff. I kind of felt like an evil hacker.
Our second expert witness isn't an evil hacker. Her real name is Svea Eckert, and she's an investigative reporter for Germany's national broadcaster ARD. She set up the fake company as part of an investigation to find out how private our data really is and how easily she could buy it.
I started reaching out very friendly and asking them if they sell data and if they would sell data to me.
There are hundreds of small companies in the tech world who gather data from things like cookies and browser plugins, things we're dimly aware of which grease the wheels of our online world, but can also track what we're doing in minute detail. And Svea Eckert found that these companies are happy to sell that data.
What they say is, we are anonymizing this data, so let's go on with the business. I mean, people were talking about data as if they were talking about, I don't know, flowers or cars or any other product or any other goods. It's not that companies are thinking about privacy or ethics or something like this. It's just a product. Data is a product.
If she'd been able to pay, there was plenty of data on sale. But to her surprise, she was eventually offered an even better deal, a free trial of access to the internet browsing histories, or URLs, of 3 million Germans.
From the very second in the morning people put on their computer until the end when they go to sleep and close down the browser. So we had every URL from 3 million people over 1 month, and this was just the cost-free testing sample.
It was a vast amount of data, and it was anonymized, so Svea could see every page that user 25467 had visited, but had no idea who they really were.
At first it was like needle in a haystack.
But she and another researcher soon figured out how to de-anonymize the records.
When you know the methods, how to do it, it's quite easy.
Now she had complete access to the browsing activity of real, identifiable people, every single website they'd visited.
What I felt when I was seeing all these URLs under each other and all these people's minds and day life and all their sorrows and dreams and what they're doing and thinking, and I felt really awkward about it because I thought it's not meant for me. For example, which was, I think, really embarrassing, was one judge we found. He was also waiting a baby, so he was searching for a crib and a new home, an apartment, stuff like this. But he also was watching many hours hardcore porn in the evening. Very hard stuff.
The web addresses also pointed to details of a criminal investigation and the complete financial records of a senior executive. Another businessman was searching for drugs. They also found the browsing histories of politicians from all parties, and Svea took her findings to some of them.
It was always a very awkward situation, sitting in front of each other, and then they were opening their data packet and scrolling through it and then saying, oh my God, it's all my life. They felt kind of that it's creepy, that it really got under their skin. One politician, she was searching for a special medication, if you feel weak or dizzy. And I confronted her with this information and she was, she felt really angry and bad about this. People were shocked and felt very uneasy about this.
Svea Eckert says it wasn't legal for this data to be sold, but that there's been no action against the company selling it because it was based outside the EU. So is privacy dead? Our second expert witness has shown us that when you think you're surfing privately on the web, you're not alone. So much data is being collected which can be bought or hacked, and the supposed protections, like making us anonymous, often don't work.
I was kind of shocked how many also very small or companies have this sensitive data, because I thought, okay, maybe Google has a lot of money or Facebook has a lot of money to prevent themselves for hackers. But some smaller companies don't.
Those big companies, Facebook, Google and the others, have huge incentives to avoid these types of breaches, so they don't sell your data and they invest heavily in security. But even if your data is safe, what about the business model that's at the heart of what they do? You give up your data for better services. What does that mean for our privacy?
Part 3. The Post-Privacy Economy.
My father was dismissed from prison in East Germany, where he spent a few years as a political prisoner. They thought he was a spy of the Americans.
When anyone wants to make a point about internet surveillance, they compare it to East Germany, a vast surveillance state where at one stage 1% of the population was working full-time for the secret police. Andreas Weigand experienced it personally when he tried to get hold of his father's secret police files.
A letter came saying, "We are sorry, your dad's files had been destroyed to protect the informants. But since you asked, how about if we send you your file?" And that was amazing to me, that they had a file for me.
And how did you feel knowing that?
Vulnerable, I think.
Given this experience, did Andreas Weigand become a privacy zealot?
I've realized that even if you were a privacy zealot, you don't have a chance. Data is being created as we breathe, as we live. It is too hard a battle to try to live without creating data. And that is a starting point, that you assume that we do live in a post-privacy economy.
Andreas Weigand used to be chief scientist for Amazon and has just written a book called Data for the People, How to Make Our Post-Privacy Economy Work for You. He says the time has come to recognize that privacy is now an illusion.
A life without creating data is not a life worth living anymore.
His argument is that we should embrace the fact that we're creating lots of data because we get better products and services in return. Eventually, this will mean that data about us will be used to make wide-ranging decisions affecting our lives, as is already happening in China.
It's amazing how in the last couple of years that Sesame score has become super popular. Everybody knows their Sesame score.
The Sesame Score has been developed by an affiliate of Alibaba, a vast company which is involved in Chinese equivalents of things like Amazon, Google and Facebook. Data about users, everything from personal information, payment ability, credit history, to social networks and shopping behaviours, is used to calculate what's called a social credit score.
Based on that score, you might be able to get a government job or not. You might be able to send your child to that good public school or not. Or more trivially, you might be able to take that VIP line at Beijing Capital Airport or not.
And that's frightening.
That is frightening. But at least the criteria, how that score is constructed, is public knowledge.
In this post-privacy world, what matters for Andreas Weigand is what he calls transparency and control. If companies are making decisions about us based on data, he says we have the right to know clearly what behaviour is affecting those decisions. But his solution isn't that the company shouldn't know or judge you, but that you should consider changing your behaviour. So with Sesame Score,
there's one term, whether you are visiting your elderly parents regularly. If you do not visit your parents regular enough, then your score goes down.
So in this case, not visiting your parents is bringing your score down. You could visit your parents more. But doesn't that just mean conformity?
Yeah, but it's at least made explicit.
For scientists like Andreas Weigand, this kind of transparency means better data. And better data means everything can be optimized. But he isn't quite ready to abandon all privacy. So would you publish your browsing history?
No way.
Why not?
Our browsing histories are way more personal than what we share with our partners. Our most secret questions in our mind, our most secret desires, they end up at Google and where Google takes us.
Our third expert witness has painted a picture of a world in which most privacy is well and truly dead. And for him, this world is coming whether we like it or not, so we may as well embrace it. But is he right?
Part 4. Watching the Watchmen.
The beauty of what's been occurring in the past year or two has been that some companies have taken security and privacy much more seriously.
Our final expert witness is Gus Hussain. He's head of Privacy International, a global NGO campaigning for privacy.
What is disappointing is that below the waterline, some of these companies have doubled down or tripled down on the extent to which they are grabbing data and doing things with that data without you ever being able to see.
More data and doing more with it. Sounds like the post-privacy economy we've just heard about. But if we don't want that kind of society, what can we do? Gus Hussain says individual users can be more conscious of their privacy and use products which protect it better, but also that there's a limit to how much individual behaviour can achieve.
Almost every positive move that Facebook and Google and the other large companies have taken has been as a result of regulatory pressure.
The impact of this regulatory pressure varies around the world. Most tech companies are based in the United States,
where, due to mostly political impasse, they've been incapable of creating a regulatory framework. And these companies have grown more and more powerful with greater lobbying influence, so they stem any attempt for regulation in the United States. And so American consumers are left with practically no protection.
That lobbying influence has proven less effective in Europe, where a new law called the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, is due to come into effect next year.
When it was being debated in the European Parliament, it was the most amended piece of legislation in EU history. The amount of submitted amendments reached, I think it was like 3,000 or 4,000 submitted amendments, which is entirely down to the internet economy leaders who were saying, no, please change this, please change that. They lost.
GDPR will strengthen individual rights over data and apply to all companies which process the data of EU citizens, no matter where they are in the world. Those companies will face larger financial penalties for breaches and will have to simplify their privacy terms and conditions so it's clearer what people are signing up for. But while Europe is strengthening its privacy protections, Gus Hussain says that in the developing world, they're languishing.
There are over 107 countries now across the world that have data protection laws, and they're all relatively similar. The divergence isn't necessarily in the letter of the law. The divergence is whether or not there's an independent regulator who's there to serve the interests of the citizens and consumers.
And does that mean that in parts of the developing world there may be stuff going on because of an absence or a weakness of regulation?
The most pernicious behavior by global companies is that they will protect the privacy of Europeans and begrudgingly of American consumers when they're forced to, but they will continue to exploit the rest of the world.
Even if regulation is improved, data will still be vulnerable to hacking. Gus Hussain says that big companies might think again about the data they collect as the cost of protecting it rises.
Instead, the response will be, we need to collect less data. That is the ultimate safeguard. Don't have much data. Don't create a honeypot for every attacker who's going to want access to it.
That's the best case scenario. And the worst?
My worry is that we'll become desensitized and we'll become quite resigned to the fact that, yeah, our data is harvested and yeah, I guess it's not secure and I guess any criminal who wanted to can get access to it. And that has terrible knock-on effects. The individual will no longer have a sense of control over his or her life, his or her own data, and as a result, autonomy and dignity that goes with that.
So is privacy dead? Our expert witnesses have made clear that it's under threat, perhaps more than most of us realise, because of the bargain now at the heart of our system, our private data in return for products and services. But with every big hack or data breach, every time a database of ruin is exposed, we'll have to keep answering the question, is that bargain worth it? That's all for this edition of The Inquiry, and from me, James Fletcher. It was produced by Sandra Canthal and mixed by Rod Farker. As we mentioned, we recently did a program asking how powerful is Facebook's algorithms, which you can check out in our podcast feed.